What exactly is a TSP and how does it differ from traditional MSPs or managed service providers? As companies consume more and more systems and services, the need for efficient management becomes critical. Enter the tech service provider. But with business tools scattered and efficiency on the line, how do you bring it all together? This is where TechGrid steps in. Today, I'm speaking with Philip Wagner, founder, CEO, and the driving force behind TechGrid. We're going to be talking about how they're reshaping automation as a platform in IT service management for the TSP, turning the chaos of scattered tools into a unified, streamlined operation. This is episode 88 of Great Things with Great Tech. Don't forget to head to YouTube at GTWGT Podcast or on all good podcast platforms. Hit like, subscribe, follow to get all past episodes. And now, episode 88 with Philip Wagner from TechGrid. All right. Hey, Philip, welcome to the show. So, CEO and founder of TechGrid, but also Chief Product Officer as well. So, I love what we're going to talk about here. I feel this is going to be a really fun episode about MSPs and a groundbreaking platform, which I think a lot of us know about the old platforms that are used in this space, but TechGrid is certainly trying to sort of disrupt that old mindset. So,
I would
just to
argue that
start off with,
the other systems aren't platforms, but that's another
oh, that's
debate.
it. So we're already gone there. So there you go, and we're going to dive into that as well, the non-platform side of it. I've
Yeah, that's
already
right.
tripped up on that. But
That's
yeah,
right.
hey, so tell us number one. So tell us the
Yeah.
platform TechGrid. What
Yeah.
is TechGrid?
Yeah. So we're a software company and we're connecting businesses that are buying technology with the service providers like MSPs and VARs that are providing the technology to them. And then we're also connecting the partners that work with the MSPs and VARs. And these are like the OEMs, the distributors, the financial service providers. And so really what we're trying to do is build this digital ecosystem, connecting the technology channel, the IT channel, if you will, connecting them together to serve the business customer.
Right. So TechGrid doesn't necessarily replace existing tools, but it's basically bringing everything together in the one platform.
Yeah.
Get that right as well.
Yeah. There
To
you go.
basically make things more efficient
Yeah.
for the MSP, which effectively translates to the customer and the tenants as well, right?
Yeah. So the funny thing about the industry today is, the IT channel, which is where businesses consume, technology, has been around for 45 plus years.
Mm.
And kind of the funny thing about it is it's been designed for 45 years to sell things like networking to the business customer,
Yeah.
and which is, networking products and services. But the actual infrastructure that's running the IT channel is completely fragmented. So things like digital connectivity to distributors and things like digital connectivity to manufacturers, all those types of things aren't connected. And so our first kind of task is, how do we tie all these companies together so again they can serve the business customer.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, that's happened kind of not really on purpose, right? It's happened because of the way that this technology has evolved, the way that the internet, the way that services, cloud, SaaS, shadow IT, it's caused this kind of glut of disparate technologies and systems and applications and tool sets to be used. And something like TechGrid is bringing that all together to make it easy again. That's kind of the way that I see it anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and that's exactly correct. And just to amplify that problem is,
Hmm.
you've got companies like the one you work for, Veeam, and then you've got 1,000 other companies that are like that, and that's Cisco and HPE and Juniper and all that, and they all have kind of their own systems and quoting processes and how they operate. And what that's done over time is just really fragmented the market. So if I've got 1,000 different manufacturers available through a distributor like Ingram Micro, I've got all these different, disparaging or fragmented processes with all those different companies. And the problem with that in today's world is that if I'm a reseller or a VAR or MSP, I've got to somehow package all that crap together and then be able to
Mhm.
present it to my customer with my own stuff that goes along with that. And that's really the
Yep.
challenge that we're solving.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about front end tool sets as well. We're talking about back end systems, billing, all that other stuff, which I think a lot of people don't necessarily want to be doing as well. And if that can be made easier as well, all in the one system and platform as well, then that's going to be beneficial. So that's cool. So we've got a little bit of an understanding about TechGrid itself, and we're going to dive into it a little bit further. But give a bit of background about yourself, where you came from, where you work. 'Cause I think we share sort of similar lineage in terms of working in MSPs and CSPs and whatnot. So tell me about yourself.
Well, I actually went to school for youth ministry, believe it or not, and but which means you don't have a normal job. So I so I ended up getting a job in technology sales when I got out of school, and I was working for a small telco kind of company, and I
Mhm.
had 4 or 5 years of experience in different startups, and then I ended up starting my own company in 2006, and that was
Yep.
called Secure Edge, and we
Okay.
were a network integrator. It's converted into an MSP and a VAR.
So when you say network integrator, so what tech were you working and what were you offering as a
Yeah.
service?
Well, so actually back in the day, if you remember back, it's really funny to think about now, but in 2006 and 2008, like Wi-Fi was innovative. Like
Yep.
Wi-Fi was like, college campuses were saying, hey, we might offer Wi-Fi. If you remember that, hey, it's 54 meg, which didn't mean you get 54 meg. And so we called the company Secure Edge because we were going in and building out these big Wi-Fi networks and with secure and network access control and switching and
Yeah,
Wi-Fi,
right.
and we were deploying 500 access points or whatever on a college campus and then turning that on for them. And so we
That's
liked the name.
awesome.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's awesome. Like
Okay.
that's I actually went back and thought, you triggered a memory. I love often this happens on this show when I'm talking to people kind of similar vintages, right? And we're talking about the tech that we've kind of put to the back of our minds. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, yeah, back in 2006, 2005, my laptop didn't have a Wi-Fi card in it. I used the external one, and sometimes you got the aerial that stuck up as well, and that was better because that would amplify the volume. And
Oh
so
yeah.
and 54, we're talking about this sort of tech that was we didn't take as for granted as what we do today. It was kind of like this is some really cool shit that we're going down here.
Actually, that's actually exactly the process happens is it was innovative, like back then it was innovative. And what happened as that technology got, more and more used by more and more customers is it's the technology life cycle. They take it for granted. And it ends up being, it goes from being like this amazing, new cutting edge thing to, yeah, of course we need to have that. So as I ran that company, we started offering managed services to go along with it. And we started thinking
Mhm.
about how could we provide it more like a utility. And so we started trying to figure out how could we package a network and deliver it like an AWS, because at the time AWS was going like
Yeah,
this. And we were
yeah.
like, man, could we figure out how to do that with a network? Well, the big problem with networking, obviously, is that you're putting it in somebody else's building. Right. And so if I'm going to provide it as a service or whatever, I've got to actually put it out there. So we had to build a lot of tools. But what we noticed over time, just as part of the story, is customers didn't really care what technology we were using as that kind of progressed. They really just wanted it to work. And so our team had gotten
Yeah.
used to, hey, let me tell you about the 4 MIMO streams on the access point and all this. And our customers were starting to say, hey, man, I don't really give a shit about that. I just want my network to work in my warehouses,
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
we noticed there was a change in how people were consuming.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, obviously, there's a bit of a time jump to when TechGrid was rebranded, but I'm interested in that period, between 2006 and 21, because
Yep.
obviously that's 15 years, right? That's a
Yeah.
lot of time to sort of decompress. But
Yep.
when you were seeing Amazon, you were seeing a way to potentially utilitize the service, which a lot of us were doing back then. Like that period was when I started to work for a proper infrastructure as a service company doing credit card transactions, charging for resources. It was kind of the obvious thing that most people had to do. But we took our time actually getting to a point where it was actually really plausible and just actually part of everyday life, which we're kind of really settled in today. So I'm interested in those early 2010s. What did Secure Edge look like? What was the company doing and evolving into? How big was the company getting? Were you getting salespeople? Were you building out SE teams? And what
Yeah.
did it look like?
Well, actually, it's really funny to think about like how the timeline is now, and it all just makes sense. But back then, what we were trying to do is we saw AWS and Azure and all these other systems, and we said, "Oh, this is really awesome! You can literally log into AWS, press a button, and deploy an instance in a data center in Virginia. That's amazing." And so we started looking at like what's our customer experience, and it sucked. Like they couldn't buy anything from us, they couldn't do anything from us. And so we started trying to build this customer portal where the customer could log in and consume from us. And on the back end, we were using like traditional PSA software, traditional
Yep.
ITSM software, traditional CRMs. And we were trying to build this kind of customer portal on top of this old infrastructure. And we couldn't
Yeah.
do it. Like we tried
Yep.
with, the major vendors, and we tried with, Salesforce CRM and all that. And so we spent like lots of money, and probably 3 years just trying to build software on top of this kind of old infrastructure. And finally, uh, one of my product managers came to me and was like, "Hey, man, we're gonna have to build the middleware. We're gonna have to build this thing in the
Mm.
middle." And I was like, "I don't want to. You should never say that again because that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's impossible. It's too big. There's no way we can do it."
Yeah.
And he was right, and we ended up doing it.
So yeah, so obviously before that, you were kind of almost like you had a control panel,
Yeah,
effectively speaking, and you were
yeah,
tapping into elements of an
yeah.
API, or maybe it
That's
wasn't
exactly
even
right.
an API back then. Maybe it was something more primitive back in the day. So you guys were kind of struggling with monolithic type of structures, bringing it into a control panel, and really all you're doing is fronting the same problems,
Exactly.
effectively. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
if I can put it there,
yeah, yeah,
having gone through a few of these iterations
yeah.
myself, I understand that, when you're looking to develop feature sets for a control panel, yes, you're limited by what you can get out of the thing you're abstracting. So for you to basically make that more efficient, you've got to build something in the middle. There's the
Yep,
middleware, and
yep.
basically enhance it. And I think from that perspective, when you start to get, I'm kind of foreshadowing maybe a little bit, but when you get that sort of experience, you go, do we really need all of that? And can we do this ourselves? And now the game's changed because now we're actually interfacing in a different way. And we're going to talk to those guys and they're going to come to us instead of we go to them.
Right. Well, so it took us a lot of angst, if you will, to make that decision. But once we made the
Mm.
decision, we ended up acquiring a software company to do it. And it was a company
Right.
that I knew about, and the core team that we purchased had came from a startup that was sold to Facebook for
Oh, okay.
hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's where we got this core team from. And that was really the turning point because they understood microservices, they
That's
understood
interesting.
how to build the infrastructure. They understood how to make it secure. They understood multi-sided platforms, and we needed somebody with that expertise. And so it was like kind of like this many years of understanding the business and frustration with existing tools because I was actually the administrator on all these different PSA software platforms and CRMs that we were using.
Yep.
And then when we combined this kind of business experience with the ability to build anything, that's when we really started building the platform as we demonstrate for people today.
Yeah. So, I mean, so before that acquisition, it was basically, yourself and a couple of the people that you had in there trying to sort of, how did it evolve? I'm always interested in how that, how did you find those initial, programmers, developers to be able to build your stuff? Or did they kind of accidentally fall
It
into that
was
sort of,
a so it's really hard, and actually we went through several iterations. So we tried hiring contractors on like Upwork and things like that, and that didn't work very well. Then we tried
yeah.
to do like an outsourced software development team where we contracted
Hmm.
with a development firm overseas, and they did that, and that didn't work well. Now, that doesn't mean that can't work because that model does work in a lot of scenarios. But
Yeah.
we ended up just being like, man, we need our own team that only works for us. And we had an opportunity to acquire a company from somebody that I'd met through a friend, and we did
Mm,
it. And
that's okay.
the other thing that I would just, if I'll go there just for a second, just to, if you're ever considering buying a company like that to build software, what we did is we put them under a period of time, let's say 90 days, where we did like a try it, buy it, where we're like, hey, this is what we want to build. Can you guys build this? And if you
Okay.
can, we'll buy you.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, I like that. It's a challenge.
it's a
Yeah.
try it and buy it. Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
a lot of software development, as you probably know, has a lot to do with the team members that you got on the team, and how
Yeah.
you interact with each other. And so if your CTO, is hard to work with and can't, put stories and stuff like that correctly in Jira and things like that, you got a lot of like challenges. So I wanted to figure out, could we work together? And that's really what we did.
That's a really interesting concept there, and I'm sure it gets done a fair bit now that I think about it, that's quite a good way to do it, right? Like to make sure, how do you know how these guys are going to be good, and how do you know that you're going to, if the purchase that you're making is in a good way, at the end of the time, because they might actually be, to quote the words that we're using, a bit of dog shit, right? They might not be very good together and might not
Yeah.
develop, and then you've wasted your money, and then what do you do with these people? It's interesting, right? And I think larger companies can potentially absorb that. But
Yeah.
if you're a smaller company, it's a big risk, and you kind of it almost like it's a make or break type of scenario. Um, Talk a little bit about TechGrid's innovative solutions as it is today. I know we're jumping a little bit, but I want to kind of talk about MSP land and TSP land as it stands for you and how you see that, because you've been in that. But just give us a little bit of an overview of what is TechGrid, the certain the marketplace, the digital workflows, the commerce tools.
Yeah.
How does it all come together and do its thing?
Well, so when we kind of looked at the industry and the software in the industry, I'm talking about like the existing software, PSAs, CRMs, ITSMs, all the things that a typical MSP and VAR is using. The biggest thing that was missing that we saw, first of all, was connectivity. How do I connect all these tools together? And
Mhm.
you and I were talking before about how we'd used a lot of the PSA software that's been around for 20 years or whatever. And a lot of those tools are still functional and still good for the most part, depending on what kind of function you're doing with them. But they're really kind of like these dated architecture, if you will, like, for the most part. It's typically, it's hard to connect to it. It's not real flexible. And if you look at like modern systems, they're API first. They interconnect to everything. And so the first thing that we built is this marketplace functionality. And by that we mean to connect any tool and any partner that you're working with, because it's not good enough just to say, yeah, I can interact with a CRM. I actually
Yeah.
need to interact with Ingram Micro as well. I need to be able to talk to TD SYNNEX. I got to tie these partners together in one interface. And so the first thing we built is that marketplace functionality. And then the second thing that we built was digital workflows. So when we were trying to build this internally, we took all the things that we learned in the MSP and VAR business, and we said, what's the sell process look like? And it was a 10-page workflow chart. It was a 40-foot whiteboard,
Yeah.
then a 10-page workflow chart. And we tried to take those steps and digitize them. And I'm going to come back to that. And then the third thing that we built is we've embedded financial services into the platform. And we did that because we believe the whole industry is moving to an as a service, a consumption-based model. And so we
Mhm.
had to like really embed finance into the entire platform. Sorry for rambling there.
No, that's not. It's important to understand, because those three key components
Yeah.
are what makes you innovative and successful today, as per the research, right? So, and I think, to go back to an earlier point about the evolution of the MSP to a TSP, and so we're talking about technology service provider as opposed to
Yes.
managed service provider, right? And that's interesting. And TSP probably isn't as well known as a term
Yeah.
just yet, but I feel like it's going to be what we use moving forward. So I am interested in the reasons why you built the marketplace,
Yeah.
e-commerce and the workflows. You built those for a reason. And I feel like you built those because in your journey, you understood what the evolution of an MSP
Yes.
was in
Yep.
2006
Yep.
versus 10 years later in
Yep.
2015. And what we're seeing, God, like we're talking about 10 years after that now, 2014, right? So take us
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
thought process and how that's evolved.
Yeah. Well, I have really strong opinions on this because I just kind of lived through it. And when we started the company, we were more of a VAR, a network integrator. We would go in and we would install it. And then after we installed it, the customers would say, we go back in 4 years later and they'd never updated the OS. They'd be, hey, this doesn't work. And we're like, well, yeah, you haven't updated
Yeah.
the software. And, which is a security problem. And so we ended up selling managed services. And we became a managed service provider. So we go in and we provide the infrastructure, and then we manage it after the fact. And then the evolution past that was, hey man, can we just pay a bill? And can you just make this stuff work? And so you end up being an infrastructure as a service provider. And in the industry, it's kind of like when it started, it ended up fragmenting into VARs. I'm a VAR, I'm a solution provider, which means my business is primary resell. And then the MSPs were kind of like, yeah, we're too good to resell. We don't care about the technology. We're just going to manage it. And
Hmm.
both approaches, I think, are emerging because of what the customers are saying. And if you read all the super geeks in the industry, the all the industry analysts are saying that 85% of infrastructure that gets put into a building, it might be 75% of the infrastructure that's put into a building is going to be consumed in an as a service type of model. And that just
Hmm.
means that those are going to merge MSPs, VARs, and all that. And so we just call that you're a tech service provider and you
Tech
provide
service
technology to
provider.
businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about this. I was in China a couple of weeks ago, and they were in a serviced office out there in Beijing. And I remember I went to get a coffee from the coffee machine, and I went to work it, and I couldn't. The buttons weren't working. I'm like, "What's going on here?" And so I went to one of the guys local, and I'm saying, "Hey, I want to get a coffee." And he goes, "Oh, hold on, I'll get the card." So basically, it's a card. Everything in China is digitalized, right? There's no money at all. So the card basically
Yeah.
links to Alipay. Alipay is
Yep.
linked to the coffee machine. You
Yep.
can only make the coffee do its
Yes.
thing if
Yep.
you swipe the card. As a really tangible example of what you just talked about in a building, even
Yeah.
the coffee is basically as a service.
Well, yeah. So when we started, Secure Edge in 2006, it was an amenity. Hey, it's Wi-Fi in a building. But think about retailers that you walk into that are walking around with a handheld device, a point of sale system. If the network is
Mm.
down, there's no power in the building. Like it's the business is dead, and it's literally not able to function if the
Yeah,
networking, the infrastructure, or software is down.
yeah. And obviously we've had a few really good examples of that in the last couple of weeks, right? Like
Exactly. We
I
say
was
this a
I,
couple weeks after CrowdStrike, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I was about to get on a plane or get checked through the airport in Hong Kong over to China when this was happening. Now, funnily enough, that was actually not impacted because of every reason that you might think is that in China they don't really use a lot of Windows. It's a lot of reverse engineered sort of systems and Linux and
Yeah,
whatnot. It
yeah.
didn't get impacted, so I was kind of safe flying through. But it really made me think about, okay, well, it wasn't so much a supply chain attack, but then we obviously understood what happened years ago with Kaseya. And I remember working on ConnectWise, and my time with ConnectWise is, and we'll talk about your time with ConnectWise as well a little bit later on.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
time was that I hosted the infrastructure, or I designed and architected and built and hosted and managed the infrastructure for the ConnectWise as a service in APJ, probably in about 2010, 2012, maybe 2012
Yeah,
period.
yeah.
Beast of a system to get going, like massive services, was always problematic. Biggest thing we worried about was, things going down, bad patches going out through the system, which happened even back then. How does TechGrid kind of combat that, as a question without notice?
Well, so I still think there's a place for a lot of the systems, but I think there's like two kind of approaches to solve the problem. Like one approach is kind of the early 2000s approach, which was all-in-one software. Hey, I'm going to build an all-in-one platform. Okay. The second kind of approach is what I would say kind of the more modern approach, and that's more of the kind of the platform approach, and that's more like Shopify. And I love Shopify as a platform because what they've said is, hey, we're going to build this core functionality, and it's for people that are reselling or merchants that are selling to customers. And they built
Mhm.
this platform that has core functions. Hey, it's got an order management system, it's got an e-commerce store, it's got all that, and that's what Shopify provides. That's what you buy at Shopify. But then there's 10,000 apps in the App Store, and you can customize it however you want. And
Yeah.
what's so amazing about that is you can, the average Shopify store has 20 apps, or inside, or at least that's what an industry guy told me. That's amazing because they've made
Mm.
all this interoperable, and that kind of like just platform thinking doesn't, I believe, is not existent in the IT industry, which is kind of funny because we're the industry selling technology to businesses.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we're selling out to.
And I totally get the faux pas at the front in terms of, correcting me on the platform, because it's true, right? Like, I think of a platform as a bit of a platform slash framework, but the platform there, I think, and again, I've been in China recently. I'm looking at WeChat. I'm looking at
Yes,
Alipay.
yes.
Alipay, you log into, and you've got Didi, the ride sharing app in there. You've got all these apps that you can use within what is the app, but the app is actually the platform.
Yeah.
then the developers, the companies can basically go in there and almost consume it like an operating system platform to do what they want to
Yes.
do out of it.
Yes.
Again, Mark, depending on at what level you act. So
Yeah.
that's tech grid's kind of mantra there, right? In terms of when you're looking at all the stacks that you've got available there in the marketplace, a company might use 5 of those, and you're just basically bringing it all together into one platform to use, but not just from a
Yeah.
consumption perspective, with
Yep.
the afterthought of billing and metrics and everything afterwards at the same time.
Yeah, so our world is run by platforms. I mean, like if you look at technology and it's sold on platforms with AWS and Azure. And then if you look at like e-commerce, obviously Amazon and whatever. And these big platforms. And you say, well, what enables a platform? Well, the first thing is it's digital connectivity. And so if you look at the letter that Bezos sent out to the employees at Amazon, I think it was 15 or 20 years ago, and he basically said, we're going to create digital connectivity between all of our systems. And if you don't do it, you're fired. Right. And I think the
Yeah.
industry, like you and I, as the industry, executives should say, this is the requirement for the industry. And there's this kind of inertia in the industry where the different OEMs are saying, I don't want to, I'm going to build my own systems. I'm only going to talk to my own thing. And that's not the way of the future. That's not the way that it's going to happen. Like we have to start connecting together. And why we have
Yeah.
to start connecting together, it's for the customers. If you buy your toilet paper on Amazon, a 2-hour window when it's going to arrive at your house. But if you buy technology from an MSP or a VAR, you have no idea where your crap is. Like we've got to solve that problem.
That's really interesting. Good analogy. I like the toilet paper and crap coming together as well. So I think you did that. I think you did that accidentally,
I
but
didn't do that consciously. Maybe it was
no,
subconsciously.
it worked. It worked beautifully. Though it worked beautifully. But yeah, I guess when I think about as a business, and especially when I was running infrastructure platforms, and it was all about people would buy a chunk of resource off us. They'd build a VM. The VM would be for a specific purpose, and they would use that VM for a specific purpose, and that would be just that. Very siloed ways of thinking. But that's been the way that businesses have only known to run, for forever, right? But the proliferation of as a service, all of a sudden, now I can go out and instead of, I don't know, it kind of is it's not great for the VM or the infrastructure company, but it is what it is. We're moving forward. There's a reason why I got out of the business. But I think now people are, been going to go, okay, well that VM, that cost me X amount of dollars per month. It got me this, but I was only using a small chunk of it, and I've got all this wastage. I don't
Yeah.
really know that I've got that wastage, but I have, and it's just not good. So now I'm just going to go buy a bit of this and a bit of that, and that's going to do it, and it's going to cost me, 1/10 of the cost.
Right.
But because of that, we've seen a distribution of systems, and I think this is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? Is that if that's going to be the way, there has to be something from a customer perspective, from a business perspective, that can be managed in one simple solution.
Yes. Well, so let's. You're very technical, and most of the people probably listen are geeks like us, right?
Mm.
But the business customer is not a geek. Like they own a
Yeah,
company, they don't know
that's
about data lakes and hypervisors and shit. They don't care. They just want it to work. And what we have to do as an industry is we have to start building solutions based on what the customer wants. So if you go to AWS and Azure and you look at the platforms, they have 200 individual products and services that you can consume to replace the things that you're just talking about. And we have to take like all the things that we're selling and start selling, oh, this is an access point or whatever, and sell a network. Hey, here's a network and it's 10 grand a month for your, building or whatever. And that's what customers want, according to all the, industry geeks. But the
yeah,
problem with doing that is I've got to buy all these things from all these different providers, combine them all together, and then add my own stuff and package that into the customer. And that is super complicated. And then if that
yeah.
infrastructure is in a building where I might put $500,000 in stuff in there, who's going to pay for that? There's all these big problems that have to be solved that we're tackling.
Can I ask, from the point of view of who you're, because ultimately technology exists to
Yeah.
make us more efficient, right?
Yeah.
And in that like we're seeing with the AI boom today, like a lot of worry about people's jobs going, they took our jobs type of thing,
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
quote
Yeah.
South Park. Um, where do you sit? Because I traditionally MSPs would pay a bunch of people, and people would make themselves pretty valuable within an MSP to do what you just said.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so this is a probably whole podcast in of itself, but if you look at the reason that people are doing things and what's consuming their time, a lot of those individual tasks are because we do not have connectivity between systems, and so you're
Mhm.
doing manual things from one system to another. A simple example is, hey, if I want to go sell $1 million in infrastructure in a building, I've got to go to a system with HPE or Cisco, design the configuration, and then I got to email that to somebody, and then they got to email it around, and then email me a quote. Like that
Yeah.
takes time, and that's antiquated and dumb, and a lot of waste in that. If you can just connect stuff together and digitize that process, then you can turn quotes around to the customer. And then that person that's doing quoting is not doing manual entry. They're actually
Mhm.
working on pricing and margins and things like that. And so once what's really funny is everybody's talking about automation, but the first step before you can do automation is you must have a digital workflow.
Mhm.
Once you digitize a workflow, now you can look at it and go, that's why don't we just automate that? Why don't we automate the bill of materials creation? Like that would be
Yep.
really cool. And then you can use LLMs and things like that and apply it into that workflow.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, when again back to working on control panels initially, and what you guys would have been doing in the early days is you would have looked at the manual process to do something with the
Yes.
back end. You would
Yep.
have written it down. You would have worked it out. You would have worked out the API calls, the PowerShell, whatever it would have been, and then you would have given it to the devs and gone, okay, here's the workflow. Now let's take that, automate it, and make it repeatable. And every time it's going to be the same outcome type of thing. That's the whole process, right? And I think we've just become that's just grown to normal business practice today. AI has obviously brought that forward as well from the point of view of that's kind of doing a lot of automation now. You trust it or not, that's another story. But I think fundamentally, when I look at what Microsoft is doing with their Copilot messaging, to me, it's all about efficiencies, yes, but then back to your point, what you said about making someone's life more able to do something more impactful and valuable to the business. Like
Yes.
how do we squeeze more out of the people to be more valuable to the business
Yeah.
and not have them waste their time? I think
Yeah.
that's
And
kind of what we're
actually, and I
getting
think
at.
what you said there is interesting too, because you said to the business. And so if you look at a lot of the AI models and stuff that are being built, well, they're being built to write code, which is cool. Or they're being built to automate, let's say, network management, which is also cool. But
Yeah,
there's not really tools being written to automate the business processes because there's no digital workflows. So if
yeah,
you went to inside on Amazon as an example, well, they don't make manual orders and stuff with vendors. It's all just automated. It just happens. They're not creating an invoice manually every time when a customer places an order. That's all automated. And so once you tie these things together, then the automation really applies. And we're applying it to the business of running the company, not the business of running the network.
yeah, absolutely. All right, hey, time's gone very quick. I've got a couple more questions just before we finish off, right? But
Okay.
yeah,
All
so
right.
really exciting, and I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's a bit of a sort of foreshadow, but also a complete loop in terms of the funding you secured from Bellini Capital. Now, for those that don't know, Bellini Capital is based
Yeah.
on basically ConnectWise founder, right? Who I
Yep.
think what's his name again?
Arnie
That's gone
Bellini.
out.
Arnie
Arnie
Bellini.
Bellini.
Yep.
Yep. So founder in I think 1982 or something of
Yeah.
ConnectWise.
Yeah.
Holy moly, that I can't believe that. And I think he sold out and had a 5-year no compete clause. Came
Yes.
out, bam, comes in and goes. I see value in TechGrid. Like, what was the value that he
Yeah.
saw in TechGrid to give you guys that sort of boost?
Well, kind of the crazy thing is I met Arnie at an event where he was a speaker, and he was talking about modernizing the tech stack for the MSPs. And he's been
Mm,
talking about this since he left the industry 5 years
yeah.
ago. And he was really the guy, I would argue, that like the grandfather, we call him the godfather of the industry, because he had like one
Yeah.
of the first MSPs, used his knowledge, and then built ConnectWise and said, hey, if I'm going to scale the business, I need to build this software. And then he sold that software to other MSPs and split it off. And he still has an MSP business, by the way. And then he had
Yep.
ConnectWise and then sold that to Thoma Bravo in 2019. And so when I met him, I assumed that he was just kind of like checked out and on a yacht somewhere because he made a lot of money. Everybody knows that. And he was really engaged. And when I showed him the platform, he was like, we need to do this together. And so he's our major backing. So we had essentially bootstrapped it for the most part. We had a handful of seed investors, which is ourselves, and some other CEOs. And then Arnie came in and joined the board. So he's awesome.
Yeah, that's good. And what does that enable you guys to do? Like, what's the future looking like now? I mean, what's the platform look like in 12 months, 24? Yeah. What's the plans?
Well, we're investing heavily in building products. So what are we doing with all the money? We're building, and we're onboarding a lot of technology service providers, and they're giving us feedback on what we're building. And so it's been cool because it's our vision combined with all of our, our customers are the TSPs, so we're building for them. And so, but there's a lot of things around automation that are coming out that we'll be able to do. And so our first focus is digitizing the entire sell and fulfill process for a solution. And then we're going to be doing a lot of automation on top of that. And then of course, the customer experience, I think, is something that needs to be fixed. And if you look at a $1 billion MSP and VAR, a lot of times it's still not very good. So there's the problems that we're tackling.
Yeah, and looking just to sort of put a bow on that as well, the UI, the user experience looks top notch in terms of the platform and how it's designed. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it, right? Like understanding that to make the UX easy, that's like 9/10 of the way there. If you can crack that, then you're going a long way to winning that TSP. So, and just very quickly, like what would you say to any MSP that's out there that hasn't quite gone to a TSP sort of thought process? What would you say to them to basically say, hey, here's a new thing for you to look at?
Well, I just think that they have to sell technology as a service. I mean, you have to sell a solution. Everybody's saying that. In order to do that, you've got to have the platform to be able to build that. And obviously, that's the problem that we're trying to solve. But I think if you can solve it and go into your customer, I think you have a big competitive advantage.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Hey, this has been great. We didn't actually talk about the fact that you're also a CPO as well. We were going to talk about, the fact that you're a very hands-on guy. So just to finalize off, what does it mean to be a CEO and CPO in a minute?
Well, I think sometimes you're CEO and you're the vision and all that kind of stuff. And I actually carry the CPO role as well, Chief Product Officer as well. And I think that's really important to do what we're doing because you'd have to have really this business process knowledge to be able to, build these kind of digital workflows. But it's a very difficult job, but I think very, very important for what we're building.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks a lot for that. I mean, TechGrid seemed like a really interesting company. I think you've got a great opportunity to capture a huge market, right? Because the MSP market, it's not going to change. Like you said, It's just growing more and more. We're consuming more and more products, more services as a service, and we need to make it simpler and more efficient. That's what we're getting at. Business outcome is what's important here. So really looking forward to seeing what you guys are doing in the future. Thanks for being on Great Things with Great Tech, episode 88.
Thanks, Anthony.
Hey, just as a reminder, thanks for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to highlight companies and technologies shaping our world. Don't forget to follow us on social media at G2WGT Podcast and visit g2wgt.com for more great content and all past episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Please spread the word, and if you feel like it, drop a review. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Great Things with Great Tech.